This is Chris from DiasExMachina, and we are live. I'm hoping that we've got this working. We are attempting to pop this up on our stream, and if anybody is interested in having questions, you can go ahead and ask them. I've also sent an invite to somebody else, and we are checking to see if they are going to pop up. We haven't yet, but we are going to keep on watching. If you have any questions or concerning anything, okay, I know I'm online, then please post in the comments in regards to either Amethyst, Ultramodern, or any of our future projects and so forth. Click it here, and then we can talk about it. Now, right now, Ultramodern is sitting at about 34,000. We are close to going through our first stretch goal. The big 800-pound gorilla that was Gloomhaven launched a couple, I think yesterday, and I'm kind of surprised. I was expecting it to blow up more than it has. And I understand that the Board Game Geek page for Gloomhaven Second Edition is kind of a crap show right now, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen. But there's very few mid scores. There is just all zeros, like all ones and all 10. That's all it really is. And there's been a lot of commentary that they should be. My Degos are acting up. That there should be some limitation. They should do what Rotten Tomato does and basically make it impossible to review something until it actually has been released. And this is something I'm very much for, because the only time I've ever gotten a really negative review on Board Game Geek was before anyone could have possibly played it. And that's very frustrating. And I kind of wish that Drive-Thru-RPG did that. Which they did what Drive-Thru-RPG does. Drive-Thru-RPG does absolutely curate all of their reviews. And it is really good, because that if there's a review on your platform that you think is fraudulent or baiting or trolling, you can flag it, and they will look at it and they will delete it. And I've actually had at least 3 reviews get taken down. One of them got taken down without me asking. Someone just looked at the review and said, well, this is not supposed to be here, and it got deleted. So I've only filed issues 3 times, and all 3 of those situations, the reviews were taken down because they were they were very done in ill content. They definitely had an ulterior motive. Sometimes it's a situation where they have complained about the printing quality, which is, once again, has nothing to do with Drive-Thru-RPG. One person was commenting about the Kickstarter, which is, once again, nothing that has to do with Drive-Thru-RPG. So it does happen. So right now, as it stands, we're about $700 away, $700 US from getting to our first stretch goal. Our first stretch goal is, what is our first stretch goal is, I think it's just artwork, is it? No? Oh, it's, the expansion of the threshold. That basically gives us a bit more artwork. Yeah. Thanks, Corey. Yeah, exactly. It's like damaged in shipping, and it's just like that has absolutely nothing to do with that was one of the ones. Hey, Square Peg. And we've been looking at what we're going to be doing in the future. I've been talking with William, and right now, as it stands, the priority is going to be leaning on him to complete these 4 adventures in a timely fashion. We did have plans of including another adventure. I'm not sure if we're going to get to that point. But one thing people will notice if they do visit the campaign is that we've adjusted up. The reason why is that we didn't have a 40K stretch goal. I generally do things in 5K increments. That's basically how I work things. And 35 is expanding threshold. Then the 40K was supposed to be Biohazard. It was going to get included with all expansions, but we decided to use Biohazard as an early bird. And because Biohazard was included as an early bird, it was no longer appropriate to be a 40K stretch goal. So there was nothing in that entry. That has actually been changed. Now the increased adventure artwork has been moved up from 45 to 40. and Invasion Proxy has now been moved up from 50 to 45. Now, Invasion Proxy is an adventure that we finished. If you remember the original Ultramodern 5 when it came out in 2016, it included 2 adventures, and these are 2 different adventures that showed up in Ultramodern Redo. Redo had a smaller version of Threshold, and it had Necropolis. And in the original Ultramodern, we had Invasion Proxy and Biohazard. Now we've released Biohazard and Threshold and Invasion Proxy separately. They've been expanded. There are more encounters. There's more battles. We didn't add any more when it comes to illustrations. We didn't add any more maps. But what we did is we added some more monsters and we added some more encounters. Invasion Proxy got, I think, a lot more than Biohazard. Biohazard got, I think, 2 more encounters and 2 more monsters. We pulled some more monsters inspired from Left 4 Dead. And then Invasion Proxy got, I think, several more monsters that were incorporated and a couple new encounters. And then the other big thing is that we also added a bunch of narrative slugs, which the original campaigns didn't have. And now, as a result, in some situations, these campaigns are double the size. So if we get to 45, we are going to include that, which means all pledges 35 and up, which is basically the 6-pack and up, will receive that Invasion Proxy. So if you don't already have Invasion Proxy, and not a lot of people have because it just came out, you will have that. It's basically going to be your 7th adventure. There's actually a decent possibility we could actually reach that. We're not even halfway through our campaign yet, so this is looking pretty good on our behalf. And yeah, like I said, if anyone has any questions, I'm pretty sure whether or not William is on Twitch right now. But like I said, I'm also going to talk kind of quickly about. Oh yeah, look at that, he is. He's on Twitch right now on his channel. That's interesting that he did not put himself as a stream on the main page. Oh, he has. Oh, look at that. William is on that. Look at that. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to comment on him. I'll say, hey, man, I'm doing a stream right now on my other pages. So yeah, William basically creates modules and dungeon maps on his page. So he is. Yeah, I can see that right now that he's doing that. Well, I don't want to complicate things. We're going to talk very quickly about what is going to happen in the future, and our next project is going to be probably a reprint of Apex and Neurospasta. Neurospasta is our cyberpunk adventure. Now, there's been quite a few cyberpunk adventures since then, and Neurospasta was the first, and I'm hoping it's going to, incite people. It's very much inspired by Ghost in the Shell, and since so far, I think most of these have been trying. How I would put this. They're trying to replicate the original Blade Runner aesthetic or the original 80s retro aesthetic. And then we have Biopunk and a few others. So Neurospasta was definitely trying to push the Ghost in the Shell. And if we run this campaign, we're going to lean into that, include more vehicles, more weapons, and so forth. And the Apex, of course, which is superheroes. And I don't think anyone's really tackled superheroes. So I think if we push superheroes in for our next project, and Apex has always been very small. It's been probably our second most successful individual product after Ultramodern. It's Ultramodern, I would say, Apex, and then Amethyst. Although Amethyst technically doesn't count because there's Amethyst. If you add in all the Amethyst versions of the sequels and so forth, it's certainly done more. But if you look at individual book sales, then it's Apex and then Amethyst Quintessence, and then Neurospasta. Question here: does backers get charged at the end of the campaign or upfront? All crowdfunding always charges after the campaign. So if you don't fund, you don't get charged. This is different. I guess it's not true. I think Indiegogo does charge at the time, and obviously with a certain, I'm not talking crowdfunding, but fundraising for certain things, then that's different. Like if you're raising money for charity or for cancer research, there could be a goal, but that goal doesn't really mean anything. Kickstarter, Game on Tabletop, and BackerKit all run the same model, which is the reason why they all kind of look the same. And that is, you pledge, you have a credit card attached, and then that's basically it. You only get charged when the campaign succeeds. And this has resulted in some people are sometimes they overpromise, and sometimes they wait until the pledge manager launches before they make their decision. So we have here a question here, a big one. So one thing I keep saying that would be hella helpful for me to get me away from 5e and UM5 is to be going to be introductory ventures. Something that will only get me learning the product without the. Let's go through the whole question here. Something that will not only get me learning the product without full reading, but also something that to help players switch. With Biohazard and Invasion Proxy, now when I did Affinity, we decided that we were going to include all the rules you need. So technically, if you didn't want to run sci-fi characters, you could run Paradise with just the PHB and nothing else. We included all the rules. So we included the weapon rules, all the new rules that you would need if you wanted to play any of the play Paradise. And we did that for all of them. We included all the firearm rules. So there's about 10, 15 pages in front of each book that basically tells you all the important stuff. With Biohazard and Invasion Proxies, definitely with those two, we did write them in such a way to include the rules that you need. I don't know whether or not Biohazard and Invasion, they do include a basic outline, and they do give you pre-generated characters. But I don't know whether or not Biohazard and Invasion Proxy did go in and add in all the rules that you needed to play. But that's actually not a bad idea, is going in there and adding in all those rules so that people know. And when I do my campaign guides, Threshold and Retroverse, I'll probably do that. I'll probably include all the rules you need to play it, but obviously it won't include the classes. But at least if you want to create homebrew fantasy classes without having to have Ultramodern, you can do that. I don't know what except Frontiers. I'm not sure what that means. So yes, basically when we get down to it, that's not a bad idea. There has been some talk about breaking Ultramodern 5 from canonical or say hardline rules 5e and going as a standalone, doing the Cobalt Press, which they're finishing up their campaign like right now as I'm talking. I think they're down to the last few hours. They're crossed 1 million, like they're blowing up. If we do something like that, it wouldn't be a replacement for Ultramodern 5. It would be a way for players to have their own book. Oh yeah, in case you're wondering, if there's also Frontiers. I've never heard of Frontiers. It's a crowdfunding platform that charges up front. Looks like messages get to you slower than I type. Yeah, by the way, there's like a 20-second delay from the stream to the messages popping up. So that's why it sometimes people go, it takes a while for this to pop up. So if you're having issues with the time delay, it happens. It takes about 20 seconds for me to catch up to the questions popping up. So the idea is with this player book is that it was going to include just the player content, just the stuff from the front half. So weapons, it's going to have the classes, races, all the stuff that a player's handbook would have, and the rules. It wouldn't have the monsters. It wouldn't have the campaign guide. It won't have the adventures, and it won't have any of the pre-made settings at the back. So basically it cuts out the last half of the book. However, what it also does, we will probably, like right now I'm writing Amethyst Revelations. Amethyst Revelations, very few people don't know, Amethyst is very much kind of the prototype for Ultramodern. I throw stuff at the wall on Amethyst, and if it sticks, it goes into Ultramodern. Ultramodern always comes after Amethyst. In fact, I always write Amethyst first. So I wrote Amethyst Quintessence for 5th edition in May of 2016, and Ultramodern came out in August of that same year. I write the rules for Amethyst first, and then I take the setting. Wait, you think that I would write Ultramodern and then adapt Ultramodern to Amethyst because Amethyst has a setting, but I don't. I actually do it with Amethyst, and then I remove and then add additional stuff for Ultramodern, and that's how I always do it. And right now, since we're doing Revelations, we've been I've been playing with a lot of really neat ideas. A lot of really neat ideas. I was going to admit that some of them include. Now we have Exo Armor in Ultramodern that came from Amethyst, and that gives you kind of basic mecha, not the big mecha in the mecha construction chapter, but basically the idea of pre-generated things. It's basically an armor with predefined magic items attached to it. So if you have this certain exo armor like an apostle, it counts as a legendary and 2 very rare items, and that's how we do it for game balance. And so an armor is going to have a threshold, which is going to have its own hit points. Those hit points are just a bonus. The suit never actually goes down until you get reduced to 0 hit points. So even if it has its own threshold and those hit points go down to 0, the suit just continues to work until you're down to 0 hit points. They're very much an extension of who you are. They'll have they're self-sustaining, so they don't have a strength. They'll sometimes offer they'll sometimes replace your own strength. They'll replace your own speed, and sometimes they'll have other abilities as well. So we have 3 levels of exo armor: light, medium, and heavy. And the lights were basically just power suits. And then mediums, there's a little bit of augmentation, but not much. So a light suit, some of the light suits are more powerful than others, but light suits are basically, there's very little augmentation, just a couple of other additions. Where heavy suits are one where you could actually be sitting inside a large mecha. In fact, the Amarok, which came from Amethyst, and I think it has a different name in Ultramodern, is a chicken walker. It's a 2-legged, it's got no arms, and you sit around inside, and it's a large suit. So with Revelations, I decided to throw caution to the wind, and we introduced something called super heavy exo armors. Now, these obviously have no parable to D&D because D&D ends with heavy armor. There's no super heavy fantasy armor. Behave. So super heavy exo armor are large to huge, which means they're very, very specific. They are specific to the point. How I explain this? So the super heavy exo armors are huge, and what I mean by specific, it has to be specific environments where they're used. I mean, for a GM, there's not a lot of situations where a GM is going to create a situation where a huge mecha is going to be available. If you're doing dungeon romps, you're never going to be able to use this thing. So super heavy is huge, and there's a couple interesting things. One, beyond the fact that it has a lot more weapons, or a lot more hard points, so you can add weapons. It also has a lot more hit points. It has a bunch more functions. It operates a lot. The big difference between a super exo and a regular exo that we had in Amethyst, the super heavy exos can be piloted most of the time, be piloted by 2 or 3 players at the same time. Now, this is freakishly weird. So basically, it means on your turn, let's say you're initiative 25, and so you're at the first initiative order. You get to use the mecha. You have a position on the battlefield. You can use your movement to move it. You can use weapons. Then let's say Frank is at initiative 20. He goes next. He can move the mecha again, but this is where teamwork comes into play. If you guys are fighting who to fight, then you guys should not be inside the cockpit of a mecha. But you also can attack, and you could also move if for example, that if you guys have done your teamwork and now it's important for your mech to move. This means a mecha can move twice in one or more in one cycle of initiative. But more than that, you get to also use weapons. You cannot use the same weapons that the previous person did. So that's why that's why these mechas will sometimes have 2 to 3 to 4 weapons, because the weapons you use, the other guy can't use. And we have some very, very large. We do have huge. There's a 3-legged one. Like, there's some gigantic things. These things have like 100 extra, 150, 200 extra hit points. And some of them do level adjustment, which means if you have this thing on the battlefield, your group is counted as 1 initiative higher for the purposes of scaling encounters. So if you're average level 5, adding this thing will may get you to level 7. You're fighting a level 7 creature and you defeat it, you're still getting XP for a level 5 creature because you are that much more powerful. We introduced this in the mecha system, and we've been playing with it more and more. And I think the more we use it, the more it starts to make sense to people. Um, so my mini factory crowdfunding is called Frontiers. Oh, okay, okay. I have to take a look. I've never heard of Frontiers before, and neither has Square Peg. Let's see. Is it hard? Okay, let's go. Is it hard? Let's read this whole thing. Is it hard in the 5e ecosystem to create modern content? There are lots of people trying to create settings and content. Are you hoping to coexist collaboratively with other rules and settings, or is it better to try to be more ubiquitous within a modern subgenre? It's a slightly confusing question. Is it hard to create a 5e ecosystem to create modern content? Absolutely not. It's actually quite easy and liberating. I did it with 4th edition. Obviously there was tons of versions that came out with 3rd edition. I did it with 4th edition. I was one of the few people who did it for 4th edition. I was the first person who did it for 5th edition. There's a couple people doing 5th edition modern stuff. Obviously, we've seen Everyday Heroes that just came out now. We have Hyperlanes, which is hard sci-fi. We have Carbon 2185. That's what it's called. So obviously a lot of people doing it. I make a point, and this is nothing against them specifically. I have never read those books. I make a point to not read them for a couple of reasons. A, I don't want to be accused of lifting ideas from them. And 2, I don't want to get frustrated if I see that they're taking ideas from me. I'm going to assume that some of them probably have, but we're all part of this OGL SRD system. So if I contribute rules, they actually have the right to use them if they wish. They don't have to give me credit because that's how the system works. And I don't have to give them credit if I decide to borrow one of theirs. But my natural instinct is just to be on the defensive. So it's not really right for me to be defensive, but I do. But as a result of that, I make a point to not read them. So I've not read Carbon. I've not read any 5e non-fantasy. I haven't read a lot of 5e fantasy. I basically stick with the primary core books. And because I'm writing so much of my own homebrew, I don't have a lot of time to read other people. Hell, I haven't even read the adventures that William has written. But I'm excited and looking forward to them. Now, the other part of that question is it better to try to be more ambiguous within the modern subgenre? Are you hoping to coexist now, collaboratively? Now, the thing is, of course, is that when I wrote Ultramodern, one of the rules I stipulated that it had to be 100% compatible with 5e. So anybody else that creates content that is also 100% compatible with 5e, that can play off of the PHP, that means by definition that they should be compatible to my system, unless they are writing new rules on top that counteract with my rules on top. Now, some systems like Everyday Heroes break away from 5e. They use 5e as the architecture, but they're creating an entirely new system whole cloth. And that means that they're not beholden. In fact, where there's been conversations on N-World about the differences between Everyday Heroes and Ultramodern, we both were commenting. The creator of Everyday Heroes, or one of the creators of Everyday Heroes, and myself were both commenting. And we both came to the conclusion that the biggest difference between us was Everyday Heroes was not obliged to conform to 5e architecture 100%. It is not 100% compatible with 5e. And if you want to convert Everyday Heroes into D&D, you actually have to modify it. And this is the same thing with D20 Modern, the original D20 Modern. The original D20 Modern, you actually had to modify for it to be compatible with 5e Player's Handbook. Would you guys please be quiet? They're usually not not that loud. So Ultramodern is 100% compatible. You can take things right out, take pieces out of Ultramodern, plug in the PHP, or the other way around. You can have fighters and grounders in the same adventure. And the reason why I did that is because we did this from Amethyst. Amethyst was exactly that, taking sci-fi and adding it to a D&D framework. So when we took the rules out of Ultramodern, it was going to stay compatible. Now, if we decide to go off on our own 2 feet, on our own, stand on our own, we not necessarily have to be beholden to that. Now, as I said, the other thing we did, other than the Super Exo Armor and Amethyst, we also created 5 new classes. These classes are hybrids of traditional 5e classes that have been merged together and then twisted a bit. So parts of Monk, parts of Barbarian have been combined to create a new class. Parts of Rogue and parts of Ranger have been combined to form a new class. And I don't mean like we've taken the mechanics. We've taken inspiration from the ideas of what these classes are supposed to be, and we've combined them. So we have a Maverick, and the Maverick combines elements of Rogue and combines elements that we know from the Ranger. The Equestrian, for example, takes elements from Paladin, Fighter, and Cavalier-like classes, but there isn't a Cavalier class in core PHP. Certainly there is on other ones, but I don't know. And we've had a martial artist, which once again, it's oddly enough, we have a martial artist that doesn't have any sci-fi elements to it, so it's a variant off of that one. And we have an assassin, which once again takes elements from the rogue, but we also have elements of bard as well. So if you're a thief, then the thief is also has elements of bard. So the bard and thief elements, the assassin rogue elements. So we took the assassin out of rogue, gave it to the ranger. We took the thieving elements of the rogue and gave it to the bard. And that's kind of how we created these 5 classes. The 1/5 one is the Pleromancer, which is a variant spellcaster. That will likely not carry over because the Pleromancer is really designed to be a relatively unique class to Amethyst. So we may, if we decide to do a standalone player's handbook for Ultramodern, that would be one thing that we would take those 4 classes, we add it in, and we would make it all one cohesive whole system. Rightfully so, there might be a DMG, but the DMG is less important to me because at that point you would have to have the Ultramodern. The Ultramodern core book would be the GM's tome, and then this player's book would be just for players. So the need to expand a DMG guide wouldn't be very useful. So the idea being the Ultramodern 5 core book, the one we're seeing now, would be still 100% useful because it's going to be a core book. But this is something that we were thinking maybe in a year or so, creating a book where it's just the players' handbook stuff. So just players can pick this up for themselves if they want to have a book on hand. Let's see here. Have you considered adding paper minis? And he calls, I'm addicted to paper minis. There's been some ideas about sort of, obviously we have enough illustrations that we could probably create paper minis. We do have stretch goals outlined. Like we only have 3 listed, but we're actually outlined all the way to 100K. And looking at the trend, it's unlikely we're going to hit it. Not a big deal, but I'm not against the idea of paper minis. It's just not in the cards in this one. We had a ton of wonky, weird, and interesting stretch goals for Amethyst. We actually crossed a whole bunch of them. So I'm looking forward to having fun with Amethyst. But for now, we don't have any plans for paper minis, but that could happen down the road. James Drucker, the question is more in terms of creating alongside other devs. So question there is that I had been contacted. I'll admit, somebody, I assume the big cheese from Everyday Heroes, did contact me about me writing for their system. Not as a collaboration to kind of combine our 2 systems or create something that was a hybrid of the 2 or create adventures that would operate in both of those settings. It was specifically to write for their system. And they then not long after put out a big public announcement asking people to create adventures for their system. And saying that they would publish it, they would split the revenue with publishers. And so when they approached me before they made that announcement, they said that we'll publish it, you'll receive a share of the profits and so forth. And suffice to say, I said no, and I don't think anyone here would really complain why I would say, why didn't you say no? Why didn't you say yes? I think it's pretty obvious why I wouldn't do it. I mean, if I'm creating content, I'd rather create content for my own system that I'm trying to promote and not promote somebody else's. I mean, I'm not saying that Everyday Heroes and Ultramodern are competing systems, but there is a little bit of competition. There's no way around it. There's no way around the fact that Ultramodern, even though it came out first, is now is sharing a rarefied air with Carbon, with Hyperlinks, and with Everyday Heroes. Ultramodern was the first one to hit the market that offered these kind of sci-fi rules, and now there are other people that have risen to occupy that space. And one of the reasons why I brought on William into the project was because I wanted help in expanding the Ultramodern name, because I haven't had the time to properly push this out, and I feel that we didn't get the kind of market penetration that we should have if I didn't have somebody that was dedicated to helping make Ultramodern as popular as it is, because we came out first, and we're probably still the most popular because both the original and the new one are both mithril. Um, not a lot of people talk about it. I think people still, for many ways, talk about Carbon, Hyperlanes, and Everyday Heroes more in public forums. And Ultramodern, despite its success, always kind of sits in the background. Um, so um, there, if one of them came up to me, if Hyperlanes or Starbucks, if these guys came up to me and said, "Hey, how about we create something that's a combination of our two systems and we share credit?" I'd be open to that. But the one thing I've noticed with board game designers and role playing designers, especially role playing companies, they're founded by the people who want to publish their ideas. Um, very, very few of them want to publish other people's products. There are a few exceptions. Joseph Goodman was one of the few when it comes to third parties that would bring in outside people into his fold in order to create content that they owned. I mean, that's how Amethyst got a lot of exposure, is because fourth edition got published through Goodman Games. We were doing it on our own. They stepped in to help us out. Was that relationship entirely productive? Not so much. We had a lot of problems, and we parted ways. But I always value his contribution. I always valued what he did for our exposure, and I think that it would be a much harder path if we didn't have Goodman Games there. Everyday Heroes was the biggest inspiration with this question. Yeah, like I said, they've done a lot of stuff. Like Everyday Heroes really jumped on the market. I mean, in many ways, Carbon and Hyperlands are very much enclosed. They only think about their own system. Everyday Heroes is the only one that's semi-universal, because D20 Modern was semi-universal. So that's why Everyday Heroes is the only one that is direct competition for our kind of our project. But the difference being, of course, that Everyday Hero stands on its own as a 5e inspired book, and we are 100% compatible. Now, if I were to do this player's handbook, one of the things that we could do is deviate and no longer be beholden to core 5e. We could create our own system. For those people who are aware, I have been doing streams, and once I think I'm done most of Amethyst, I'm going to be returning to those streams. We're going to have to refresh people on what we've done. Where we create a variant rule. I joked about going at 5.5. These rules are they're not huge rule breakers. That being said, from what I've read so far, I think the thing I was thinking of adding in were more extreme than what I've been seeing with Black Flag. Because the only things I've seen about Black Flag, it doesn't seem like they've changed very much. And I actually can't see anything they've changed. But that being said, full admit, I haven't read through all the rules, so I don't know whether or not they have created huge differences. And if you guys have read these rules and you can tell me, here are the big differences between these, let me know, because I'd love to know. So mine, which I call 5.75, the one thing you'll see in Amethyst, which we were thinking of doing if we were going to rebuild Ultramodern, was to include something called hereditary and trained abilities. So we know that with this new version of D&D, they were taking the ability score modifiers and adding it to the background. And some people had an issue with that. They wanted it back with the species/races. And what I decided to do is give them to both, so you get to choose if you want your species ability score bonuses or from the origin of where you pick. So that was one of the things we did. We had something called natural talents, which was something that if you were high in a specific, every single ability score had a natural talent to a skill. And that means that if you were really good at dexterity, you were really, really good at acrobatics. And so you got to do really good with those specific skills. And almost every one of them had one. Constitution, dexterity, strength. Strength was tied to athletics. Dexterity was tied to acrobatics, and so forth. We also had your ability scores also did more on their own. For example, your ability score modifier, for example, your Constitution not only told you what your hit point modifier was, it also determined your hit die. Certain classes would modify it. For example, if you were a barbarian, you would have a +2 on your hit die, which means you would go up 2 steps, which means you would peak out around D12. But if you had like a 10 Constitution, it didn't make sense that you would have a die 12 for being a barbarian. So the hit die was determined by your ability score and then modified by your class. In the same context, dexterity or strength also dictated your speed. So if you were a human, you didn't all run at exactly the same speed. If you had a dexterity of 10, your speed was 25. It only got to 30 once it was higher than 13. And if you were in the over 17, you actually got to 35. And these are some of the things we did. We said you weren't defined so much by your class and more about who you are as a person. But everything else we basically the same. The expertise bonus, feats. We did the same thing with the Ultramodern, where we put the Paragon class or the archetypes are exactly the same level. And so those are some of the biggest ones. We reduced saving throws. So right now with 5e, there's a saving throw applied to every single ability score, which can be really problematic. Now, 4th edition compressed it to just 3: Fortitude, Reflex, and Will. And we decided that we were going to do that. We were going to combine. We're going to offer Fortitude, Ref, and Will, but unlike 4th edition, where they were more like AC, where they were fixed values, this was still a saving throw. You still have to roll the die, but Strength and Constitution became Fortitude, Dexterity, Intelligence became Reflex, and then Wisdom, Charisma became Will. So that allowed you to have a pretty good spread of abilities. So if you had a high Strength and a low Constitution, you could use your Strength modifier for Fortitude. So you still had a pretty good fort save, even if your con wasn't very big. So these are some of the other things that we did. We had 4 different types of ability score modifiers. Obviously, we have Advantage, and obviously Advantage doesn't change, but we did allow double advantage, something where you can actually get a double. And we also had something called untyped advantages. One is that you had an edge. An edge gave you a +2. If you were superior, you got a +5. And if you were hampered, you got a -2. And we added those as well. So it was a bunch of things we added to it. But I think when it comes down to it, not a lot of stuff changed within the rule set itself. So there's entirely a possibility that if we decide to create this additional system, we're going to be adding in these rules, but it probably will be another section like Ultramax and so forth. But yeah, looks like we go. Look at that. We got a pledge. Yay. 424. So now we are just about $600 from 35. It'd be nice to see that number go during the stream, but that's not going to happen. So the other thing I want to talk about, and if we actually have people here still watching, and I'll open this up to the group. Retroverse Chronicles I've talked about a couple of times, and Retroverse is something I want to try a little different. I actually have a plan with all, because Threshold is kind of more traditional. It's heavy on crunch, not a lot of setting. It's designed to be this basically a very big sandbox. But Retroverse, I wanted to create a much more narrative adventure, and so the conversation I've been having with Nick is that we create kind of a narrative art book setting. So it would be a narrative story that I would tell. It would be an art book that would display Nick's artwork, and then the campaign setting. And if you have a 150 page book, the actual mechanical rules is very light. It gets down to maybe 10-15% of the entire book is actual crunch. Everything else is just setting stuff. Now, in many ways, if you look at Amethyst Factions, for example, it's already at that way already. I mean, yeah, we had monsters at the end. We have so the racial abilities, but there's no new classes. And so a vast majority of Amethyst Factions, I don't think I have Amethyst Factions in Reach. I do have Amethyst Factions in Reach. Oh, actually, that's Quintessence. There's Factions. Quintessence does have a lot of crunch. It's about 50-50. But if I was to look at this setting here for Factions, I would say maybe 20-30% at most. Because, yeah, we have the adventure at the end. We have the handful of monsters. But the life events are basically universal. The entire setting section, which is the entire 200 middle pages of the book, those are all completely agnostic to anything. And so the idea obviously being is that even though the mechanics involved would be 5e, ultimately at the end of the day, it would not be primarily a 5e book. You can actually grab it for its writing for its narrative value and its artistic value. It would be really cool if I could do that. A lot of it's going to depend on Nick, and if he wants to pursue it, because it's going to be a much larger project than this campaign can really afford. So, if you guys have any more questions, let me know. If William is still on his stream, I actually have no idea about whether or not he answered my questions. I have the volume down, and but yeah, if anyone has any questions, let me know. But yeah, I did a podcast with Paco today, and yesterday, and we were talking about Gloomhaven, and I said that I was surprised that they had their set for 2 million. Frosthaven, this is interesting. I think if memory serves, Frosthaven launched the same time as Affinity, basically within a few weeks of each other. They were pretty close. Either that or it was another campaign, but I can't remember. I could have sworn they were very close to each other. Anyway, so Affinity, I think launched around the same time, but Frosthaven raised about $500,000, about 500,000, in 10 minutes. That's what they were boasting. And this new campaign did not do that. It took about an hour and some. It got to 1 million after about 3 hours. That should be noted. That's insanely popular. That's amazingly. That's amazing. If I got even half of that, I'd be just jumping over the moon right about now. But Gloomhaven's goal is $2 million, so I'm really surprised that they set it so high, 4 times higher than Frosthaven. That's the first thing that was a surprise. The second thing, obviously, is when we closed off the podcast, I said to Paco that my prediction is that it would hit 1.5 by the next morning, and that's exactly where it hit. Now they're going to fund. I mean, their goal is 2 million. They're already 75% there. They're going to fund. But my issue is how long it's going to take for them to get there. For example, they were at 1.52 when I woke up. That was around about 8:30. They're at 1.596, so they're closing to 1.6. So they're basically doing maybe $200,000 a day, which once again, insane, fantastic. But it's actually going to be take a while for them to get to that 2 million goal. So there's a part of me that's actually curious about whether or not they're sweating right now, because they were maybe wondering, hoping that they would get to the $12 million numbers that Frosthaven reached. And once again, looking at the Board Game Geek controversy, I really hope Board Game Geek, there has to be a way to flag reviews on Board Game Geek. The fact that anyone could post anything. This is not IMDb. Come on, guys. Curate your stupid reviews. But like I said, I also think it's hilarious that their pledge train, our pledge train on the day lasted about 4 hours before our pledge train ended. The pledge train is something very unique that BackerKit does. Say if you back it, it starts the train, and that train gets reset if someone backs it within 10 minutes. So Gloomhaven's is been running continuously. It has not broken since yesterday. So they've always had a backer within 10 minutes, which is fantastic. But it also tells me how many people have canceled their pledges, because you look at the backers, it says 6,678, but 6,803 are on the pledge train, which means 130 people have already canceled their pledge in that time period. We've had a couple of cancels, but not nearly that much. So I find that very, very interesting. The other thing, I guess people will wonder, why did we do BackerKit? We talked about why we did BackerKit. It was an experiment. We wanted to test the waters, and they were giving us a pretty good deal. Will we continue to run projects on BackerKit in the future? No, probably not. There has even been talk about doing an additional campaign of Ultramodern on Kickstarter, so that people who looked at BackerKit and got turned off can still back the campaign again. We'll just copy paste the whole thing. We will probably, since we're funded, we don't need to put a goal on that one. We can put it for like $500 and start the threshold at where we ended off the stretch goal. So if we ended the stretch goal of 40 and this one's at 500, our first stretch goal would be the 45K of this one. And so if people missed it, I prefer, obviously, people don't do it, because I think that we want this campaign to succeed. But for those people who are just adamantly against BackerKit, that might be something we will look at. But Apex Neurospasta will most certainly be will be run on Kickstarter. It was an interesting experiment, but I have to wonder whether or not, looking at Gloomhaven, for example, that blew across the waters and now is somewhat struggling after a day and a half to get to that goal, whether or not the backer kit is as successful a platform as they think it is. It would be very interesting to see whether or not how Gloomhaven might have succeeded if they had launched on Kickstarter. Same thing with GameFound. Now, BackerKit kind of assured us that there were definitely a lot of role players on their mailing list compared to GameFound, which is mostly board gamers. Like, I would never run a 5e project on GameFound. I don't think there's enough people on GameFound for that. It was going to be BackerKit or it was going to be Kickstarter, and we decided to do. Originally, it was going to be the fact that we were just going to do a reprint of Ultramodern, and because we were just doing a reprint, we weren't adding anything. We couldn't do it on Kickstarter because Kickstarter, you always have to add something new. And so we switched to BackerKit, but then BackerKit encouraged us to create something new, and that's when William offered to do these 4 adventures, and so that's where that whole thing came about. But at that point, we thought, well, wait a second, we're doing something new. Why don't we just do Kickstarter? But we decided to stay with BackerKit just the same. The other thing is that if we do reach certain stretch goals, I will talk about those. Our higher stretch goals include more artwork, expanding these adventures, so expanding some of the threshold has an expansion where we make it a bit larger than it was originally planned. I'm really hoping we do that because me and my artist Memphis Wong, not Nick Greenwood, Memphis Wong, for those people who don't know, Memphis Wong did a lot of illustrations for Affinity. He did all the guns and for Taurus and a good number of the mechs for Taurus and Conestoga. He did a few things for Paradise, but like a good chunk of his contribution was in there, is in Taurus. So he did all the spacecraft. And I really like him. I think he's a good person. Actually, I have no idea if he's him or they. I think they're a really fantastic artist. I'm really hoping on working with them in the future. So they're working on Threshold. And the other reason is Nick's head deep in Amethyst, and he's going to be head deep in Amethyst for the next 3 or 4 months. So I can't have him work on another project. So Threshold is going to be me and Memphis Wong working off of that. We have a few other Kickstarter stretch goals, expanding Retroverse, expanding, obviously, once again, adding in Invasion Proxy as a stretch goal for everyone who pledged $35. And finally, there is high up there a adventure, 7th adventure, which William and I have been talking about. And we're both, even though I'm quite a few years older than William, we're both fans of 70s and 80s sci-fi, and that's why I think we've been kind of looking at that more, and that's why Retroverse was something I wanted to deal with. I wanted to capture some things from my youth. Original Retroverse was going to be the mid 80s, but I want to push it to the late 70s, so it doesn't seem like I'm just trying to rip off like 80s cyberpunk aesthetic. Not that 70s aesthetic isn't that much different, but I think it would be more interesting to pull it into the 70s. But if anyone has any more questions, if not, I'm going to kind of close this up, and hopefully in the future, William and I can do this so we're actually on the same profile at the same time, and we don't have to have conflicting ones. Is he still doing his? Yes, he's still doing a stream. I'm probably going to switch over to that and watch him for a little bit. But for all those people that have been watching, thank you. Thanks for your questions. Always love following your comments. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you guys.